flames licked the hollowed stone of the fire pit, their light flickering across the walls of a hidden cavern deep within the forests of what would one day be southern Europe. Thick smoke curled upward into the dark, mixing with the sound of breath. Slow, heavy, visible in the cold. Outside, a blizzard howled through the pine canopy, wind tearing across the frozen earth like a beast searching for warmth. Inside, huddled in furs, a small group of Neanderthals sat in silence, their muscles worn thin by hunger, their eyes reflecting not only the firelight, but the ancient wisdom of a species that had, somehow, endured. For nearly 300,000 years, they had survived in one of the most unforgiving environments the Earth has known. But how? What food carved the edge between life and extinction in a world ruled by ice and bone? Their secrets lie buried beneath layers of wind-blown soil, beneath tundra, where mammoth bones rest beside broken flints. To understand what Neanderthals truly ate is to step into a world shaped not by abundance, but by scarcity, where survival meant knowing precisely where to find nourishment when the earth refused to offer it. Through the dark centuries of glacial winters and fleeting warm interludes, the Neanderthal palate adapted to landscapes that yielded little. They learned the sounds of marrow cracking, the scent of root beneath frost, the feel of hunting winds shifting against their skin. They became masters of extraction, not just of meat, but of moments where life might be prolonged by a handful of corms, a strip of sinew, a gutful of bitter greens. But survival did not only depend on what they ate. It hinged on how they hunted, foraged, cooked, and even remembered, passing knowledge of each edible thing down through firelight, whispers. So where did those footsteps lead? What tracks still echo in the soil, whispering what the Neanderthals truly consumed to outlast epochs of cold and teeth? The landscapes Neanderthals moved through were raw, untamed theaters of hunger and instinct. Ice Age Europe teemed with dangers, but it was not barren. Herds of megafauna roamed the valleys and mountain passes, woolly rhinos crashing through frostbitten foliage, reindeer weaving silent paths along icy rivers, and mammoths whose trumpets echoed above the wind. Neanderthals stalked these worlds with patience etched into their bones. Their short, powerful frames were shaped as much by struggle as by adaptation, built to endure the harsh cold and the brutal strain of bringing down prey that towered over them. They hunted up close, ambushing with thrusting spears carved from ash and tipped with hand-chipped stone. Each successful kill was a brief reprieve, a banquet wrestled from nature's jaws. But they did not merely eat muscle. No, they knew better. They cracked the bones open for their marrow, sliced away tendon and organ, stored fat in skin pouches. Liver, tongue, heart, and brains, nothing was wasted. In a world stingy with calories, every mouthful was a victory against the dark. But even the hunt could not always be relied upon. There were seasons when herds migrated earlier than expected, or when the earth locked itself beneath crusts of ice so thick no hoofbeat could penetrate. In these bleak periods, Neanderthals turned to the overlooked and hidden resources around them. They scoured cliffside crags, carefully peeled lichens from stone, and harvested seaweed from frost-encrusted tide pools. Along rivers, they unearthed roots deep enough to escape the killing frost, roasting them methodically to neutralize the toxins lurking within. archaeological shell middens reveal their coastal adaptability through mounds of cracked mollusk shells and fish bones, evidence of nimble hands and spears, crafted not only for mammoths, but for harvesting from the sea. Forests yielded their own sustenance as Neanderthals stripped bark to access edible phloem, gathered berries during brief seasonal thaws, and reclaimed the forgotten leavings of other carnivores. Even decomposing meat was not automatically rejected. When hunger grew sharper than caution, guided by ancestral knowledge and finely tuned instinct, they consumed what others might fear. Their bodies adapted through millennia to process what modern humans would find intolerable. Theirs was not a diet of preference, but of profound resilience, surviving through a relationship with a landscape that, for all its harshness, offered just enough to sustain them across centuries. At the heart of their survival lay not only what they gathered or hunted, but how they understood the rhythms of the land itself. Generations of keen observation had taught Neanderthals more than just what to eat. It had taught them when. In the high alpine passes, they timed their movements to match the migration of ibex, learning which rock ledges offered the surest footing or the best vantage for ambush. In the lowland marshes, they built seasonal shelters near eel-filled streams, weaving intricate trapping baskets from reeds too coarse for any other use. They knew precisely that pine nuts must be harvested before the killing snows fell, and that certain mushrooms emerged for only fleeting days after the first spring thaw. This awareness was not merely rote memorization, but lived memory embroidered into the fabric of their existence, and perhaps even encoded within their language, shared through gesture, repetition, and ritual under the dim pulse of firelight. Food transcended mere sustenance for these ancient peoples. It represented lineage, survival, and in some intangible way, belief itself. Through bones tucked carefully beneath hearths and food shared in communal silence, they marked the landscapes with their understanding, their remarkable resilience stretching not across years or centuries, but across the steady pulse of millennia. But understanding Neanderthal diet also means tracing what they resisted, what they learned to avoid through bitter experience. Among their discoveries were the deadly consequences of consuming the wrong plant, the wrong mushroom, the wrong shellfish, harvested during a toxic red tide. Their bones tell stories of poisoning episodes, growth interruptions likely caused by nutritional collapse or prolonged illness. Yet from these tragedies, knowledge was etched deeper into their collective memory. Children observed elders meticulously sorting edibles from poisons, learning through witnessing both survival and suffering. They likely marked certain trees with deliberate scars to remember past mistakes, or wove cautionary lore into ritual storytelling, warning against the deceptive pale berries beneath the junipers, or the shimmering fungus found only near ancient birch groves. Food for the Neanderthals was never separated from memory. Memory, in turn, formed the scaffold upon which their future survival was built. In their solemn mealtimes, gathered around the fire, they encoded landscapes with warnings, with hope, with wisdom, earned not in times of abundance, but in constant proximity to loss. Each bite, whether of nutrient-rich marrow or bitter emergency bark, was drawn from a world where choosing correctly meant the difference between continuing their ancient lineage and absolute erasure from the earth. And still, amid those cycles of famine and fleeting fortune, the Neanderthal diet evolved not just biologically, but culturally. Evidence suggests they mastered the use of stone tools to grind plant matter, pulverizing seeds and legumes into pastes or gruels, creating food soft enough for young and old to swallow, rich enough to fill hollow bellies when the hunt failed. In limestone caves across Iberia, chemical traces from fossilized dental calculus reveal roasted pine nuts, wild peas, and even bitter chamomile plants chewed down into fibrous threads of sustenance, expanding our understanding of their nutritional adaptability. Their teeth carried microscopic particles that paint a portrait far more complex than once believed, contradicting simplistic views of these ancient humans. This wasn't merely brutish consumption of flesh, but rather a sophisticated, flexible approach to nourishment, a dynamic survival strategy refined across countless generations. Around those fire pits, food likely came with a silent reverence, a momentary reprieve from the frost-laden air pressing at the cave mouth, perhaps carrying unspoken cultural significance now lost to time. Their final bite of roasted marrow might have carried the unspoken hope that their descendants would find enough to endure, that knowledge painstakingly gathered would not vanish. In every jaw-worn molar, each charred hearthstone, and within the chemical signatures preserved in ancient teeth, we glimpse not just what Neanderthals consumed, but the haunting persistence of a people who transformed necessity into knowledge, hunger into heritage, and scarcity into survival across hundreds of thousands of years. Far from being mere scavengers or primitive carnivores, the Neanderthals demonstrated a sophisticated culinary ingenuity, born from necessity and refined through thousands of years of adaptation. Archaeological evidence reveals their mastery of controlled fire and heating techniques, with particular cave layers showing heated stones arranged in patterns, suggesting they boiled bulbs and tubers in containers made of leather or bark. This ingenious cooking method effectively leached out toxic bitterness and transformed indigestible starches into vital nutrition. Perhaps most remarkably, they appear to have developed rudimentary food preservation techniques, potentially fermenting gathered plants in underground caches, creating vital stores that sustained them through the harshest winter months when fresh food became scarce. These methods reveal not merely survival tactics, but a profound understanding of their elemental world, a wilderness kitchen built upon generations of careful observation and experimentation. Each technique represented knowledge purchased through hardship, perhaps even catastrophic failures. Yet this wisdom ensured their continued existence across epochs. They carried food methodically between seasonal camps, rationed through calculated portions during lean periods, and approached each preparation with deliberate purpose that maximized nutritional value. This relationship with sustenance transcended mere consumption, forming instead a testament to human adaptability, written not in text, but in the very soil layers we excavate today. A silent witness to their remarkable endurance that still speaks through the archaeological record, centuries after their disappearance. But even the richness of their adaptations could not shield the Neanderthals forever. As climates shifted once more and ecosystems transformed under the pressure of a warming planet, the delicate web of their survival frayed. Herd movements became erratic, plant cycles changed, and once familiar hunting grounds turned alien. Into these lands came new shapes, cousins bearing longer limbs, finer tools, and a different kind of hunger. Homo sapiens arrived not with force alone, but with an insatiable drive to reshape the environment, with networks vast enough to to outmaneuver scarcity. For a time, the Neanderthals endured, adapting still, perhaps even exchanging food, rituals, and blood with these new arrivals. But the world was no longer theirs alone. Their ancient recipes, their subterranean storerooms, and their hard-won tastes could not hold back the tide. And so, the last fires eventually dimmed. The marrow bowls emptied. Yet, their legacy lingers, not just in the fragments of jaw or hearth, but in the quiet echo of inherited instincts, in the hunger that still drives us to understand where we come from and to ask, with reverence, what was once eaten to make us who we are. Though the Neanderthals faded, their story is not a silence, but a resonance. Their diets, stitched from struggle and season, became embedded not only in the soil and the stone tools they left behind, but in the genes and patterns of behavior quietly carried forward in the currents of human evolution. The faint memories of their meals echo in our preference for roasted foods, in the deep-seated human instinct to gather around heat and sustenance, in the way famine still scars our cultures long after abundance arrives. Modern research continues to uncover traces of Neanderthal genetic material in many human populations today, silent testimony to ancient encounters and shared hearths where knowledge was exchanged alongside sustenance. Their dietary adaptations, born of necessity and refined through countless generations, may have contributed to our own omnivorous flexibility, our ability to extract nutrition from diverse landscapes across the planet. Their shadows moved with the glaciers and vanished beneath the rising trees, but the wisdom they forged from blood, fire, and root remains whispered in the marrow of who we are. In every ancient hearth, in every fossilized tooth bearing pollen and ash, we see them, not forgotten, but enfolded into the long and unbroken story of humanity beneath an ever-turning sky. Their last footsteps may be lost to time, but their knowledge lingers in every ember where humans still seek warmth, still seek meaning, and still seek to understand the ancestral hunger that once taught us how to survive. Beneath the soil and the sands of time, the last fragments of a people who learned to eat the earth still remain, quietly resistant to oblivion. The Neanderthals did not vanish in defeat, but were woven slowly into the unfolding tapestry of what came next. Their culinary code, absorbed, adapted, or mourned with every generation that followed. As we peer backward through the smoke that once hung in their caves, through the char on their stones and the fibers in their teeth, we begin to hear the soft cadence of their lives, echoing as questions within our own. What they ate was survival, yes, but it was also identity, culture, memory. Their choices were made in moments of frostbitten hunger, but shaped the very tissues of their bodies, the pathways of their minds, the sacred rituals that turned eating into meaning. And long after their disappearance, as firelight dances again on cave walls and the wind whispers through forgotten valleys, their story remains steady and clear, not a relic of failure, but a lesson in endurance. In the silence left behind, one truth rises like smoke into the night air. The Neanderthals did not simply eat to live. They lived through what they ate. And in so doing, they taught the earth itself how to remember them. Far beyond Europe's cold mountains, even as other hominins remained isolated or vanished beneath shifting climate and competition, Neanderthals continued to stretch the boundaries of existence with their teeth and hands. Cave soot and fire residue from sites in Central Asia bear witness to hunting far from their presumed heartlands. suggesting a reach more expansive than previously believed. In the Zarafshan Valley, ancient hearths were laid near streams where gazelle once drank. Their bones split with the same precision as those in western caverns. This eastward drift reveals hunger, not as a weakness, but as a tether that pulled them into new frontiers. Each meal, a wager against extinction. They were not simply wanderers in a frozen world, but intentional inheritors of the hunt, mapping seasonal rhythms across entire continents. The varied plant impressions preserved in dental tartar, traces of underground tubers from steppe grasses, conifer pollen, and starch granules from edible wild grains, show a diet bending fluidly between terrains, a menu as wide as memory could carry. In this adaptive dance across landscapes, food was compass, tradition, map, and mirror. Each bite they took in places unknown meant the past accompanied them, and the future might unfold if they remembered well enough. Through geography etched in bone and meals shared under unfamiliar skies, the Neanderthals shaped an epic of survival that never truly ended when they did. It remains quiet and enduring wherever hunger meets knowledge. Though the winds that shaped their world have long fallen silent, the imprint of Neanderthal sustenance winds through archaeology like an ancient thread, tough as sinew and quiet as snowfall. Their lives, measured in marrow and root, fire and frost, persist not only in the catalogued striations of cave walls or the careful records of excavated teeth, but in the remembered silhouette of a people who became one with the hunger they answered. What the Neanderthals ate was never simple fare. It was the sum of instinct, precision, patience, and reverence, a diet composed as much by memory as by mineral. They tasted the world as it resisted them, and in tasting, they changed it. Theirs was the long apprenticeship of survival, and its lesson is still spoken in the hushed warmth of every meal we share under uncertain skies. Even now, beneath layers of soil and story, something lingers, a smoked root, a charred seed, a hollowed bone, etched with the timeless truth that to endure is to learn the land so deeply, you become part of its pulse. In that quiet alliance, the Neanderthal lineage has not vanished. It resounds, not in domination, but in communion, not in conquest, but in knowing. And so the earth remembers them, not just in layers of ash and stone, but in the whisper of hunger answered with knowledge, the first and final recipe for survival. Long before ink touched vellum or myth bloomed from poets' minds, the Neanderthals wrote their legacy in the smallest acts of nourishment. Flint striking flint, sinew pulled taut in winter light, a mother steaming roots beside an ancient hearth. These are not stories of failure, but elegies of presence, of a people who learned to endure through a conversation with every stone, every animal track, every edible whisper in the forest's breath. As their footprints faded beneath snow and ash, what remained was this profound reciprocity, a bond between being and place, crafted not in ease, but in ceaseless learning. And now, as we pause to listen beneath the silence, to dream beneath the earthbound stars they once saw alight above their caves, we do not find a vanished people, but a living lesson carved into every fire-forged tool, every calcified molar, every char-struck floor. For in the end, what Neanderthals actually ate was the earth itself, its roots, its marrow, its bitterness, and its promise. And in doing so, they became not just survivors of an age, but architects of the memory that binds all life to the land that feeds it. Those last meals, taken in twilight caves beneath horizons darkening with change, were more than sustenance. They were ceremonies of continuity. Gathered in ever-dwindling circles around bone-warmed hearths, the Neanderthals may have sensed an ending they could not name. Their firelight flickering against stone etched with the unspoken rhythms of a vanishing people. Yet still, they prepared the roots. Still, they cracked the bones. Still, they passed the edible fragments of their world into the hands of their children. Perhaps, in that continuity, there was hope that the taste of juniper smoke on roasted meat, or the chew of gathered tubers softened in bark-lined pits, would carry something of them forward. And it did. Not in the bloodlines alone, but in the shared, sacred knowledge that survival is not won once, but learned again each day, bite by bite. Their final meals became testament to resilience, carefully prepared despite the encroaching shadows of climate shift and competition from newcomers. These silent rituals of nourishment represented not just the feeding of bodies, but the preservation of identity itself, a cultural fingerprint pressed into the soft clay of time. So fades the story of what Neanderthals ate, not as a conclusion, but as a living echo, carried onward through hunger, through memory, through every fire lit in darkness, and every human hand that still reaches into the wild to find what feeds. In their quiet departure, the Neanderthals left behind more than scattered relics. They left a cadence of understanding etched into the bones of landscapes, a lunar rhythm between need and nourishment. Every hearth they once stirred stood as a beacon in the cold, a testament that even amid erosion of land, of species, of time itself, the act of choosing what to consume remained sacred. We uncover the stones they heated, taste through analysis the roots they roasted, and listen to murmurs in sediment that hint at seaweed stews and marrow-laden feasts. This was no accidental menu, but an epic composed by minds attuned to the earth's quiet lexicon. And as we walk the same low valleys, touch fragments of the same obsidian edges, we inherit not just their tools, but the question eternal. How do we eat not to conquer, but to endure? In the scattered spoils of their vanished banquets lies a legacy not of extinction, but of profound communion. What Neanderthals actually ate was never just about staying alive. It was about belonging to a world that gave nothing freely, and answering back with resourcefulness, reverence, and resilience older than memory itself. Each layer of ash, each shattered femur, each carbonized nutshell hidden beneath the glacier-fed soils of Neanderthal dwellings tells a fragment of the same profound truth, that the act of nourishment was the essence of their existence. For them, eating was not a moment, but a continuity, a daily negotiation with a volatile world that demanded creativity, risk, and deep familiarity with the wild. Their diets were living archives, authored by generations of trial and sacrifice, rendered in the language of survival carved into stone, sung by forests, screamed by stormy coasts, whispered by thawing meadows. In the end, what Neanderthals actually ate to survive 300,000 years was the very fabric of their reality, transformed by hand and fire into life. Theirs was a legacy of edible memory, scribed into time not with pen, but with teeth and sinew, smoke and soil, teaching us still, in the flicker of flame, in the hunger that remains, that to eat is to remember, and to remember is, perhaps, to never truly vanish. In this ancient rehearsal of survival, every edible morsel was both inheritance and invention. The Neanderthals did not simply catalog food sources. They composed living systems of knowledge, embodied wisdom passed not through books or symbols, but through the trembling hands of a child learning to peel bark, the careful eyes watching for fungal warnings in shadow-mottled woods, the collective breath held in the moment a spear tip found its mark. Their sustenance was not abstract. It was tactile, relational, sacred. This was a people who ate with intention, not out of luxury, but out of necessity, woven with awe, forging with every roasted root and salted marrow, a tradition more enduring than monuments. Long after their voices were quieted, the earth kept their language alive in scents of cooked tubers, rising from hearthstones, and the resin's sticky shell of pine nuts gleamed and protected, and the salt print of sea spray on dried mollusk flesh. And now, as layers of acidic soil yield their bones and soot-stained tools to the light once more, we are asked to taste their world not with mouths, but with awareness. For what Neanderthals actually ate across 300,000 years was not merely what the world offered, but what they asked from it with care, with skill, and with reverence. In return, they gave back stories made not of myth, but of meals that tethered fiber to fate, and that, even now, nourish the ghosts of our beginnings. So, as we step back from their flickering hearths, as we let the smoke of their memory trail skyward into the deep night of our shared past, we carry with us not only the answer to what Neanderthals actually ate, but the deeper truth of why they ate it. Each root, pulled from frozen ground, each shard of cooked bone, each drop of rendered fat stirred slowly in bark bowls, was a petition to the earth to be allowed one more day, one more generation beneath the stars. Their meals were the hymns of survival, rich in silence and gravity, composed without need for language yet speaking across eons. And though their voices no longer echo in the vaulted stone chambers they once called home, their appetites live in us still, traces written in instinct and dream, in the warmth of shared meals and the search for wild flavor. Theirs was a story not extinguished but absorbed, rekindled each time hunger meets memory, and the earth, in its old generosity, answers again. In the shadows of caves and the roots of forgotten forests, they remain not as mystery, but as marrow, a people who fed not only their bodies, but the future itself. And so their final offerings to the world were not grand monuments or inscribed stone, but the lingering echo of meals crafted in defiance of disappearing. The Neanderthals left behind a culinary footprint darker than soot, deeper than bone, a testament written in pollen grains, in twisted ligaments dried beside flames, in the quiet maps of migration drawn by navigated hunger. For 300,000 years, each bite was both revelation and remembrance, each act of foraging or butchery a thread in the great web of ancestral continuity. Today, their names are spoken only in hushed museum halls or whispered from excavation pits beneath iron skies. But what they truly left us cannot be boxed or quantified, for it lives where ritual meets flesh, where instinct builds tradition, where fire meets root and transforms it into destiny. In understanding what Neanderthals actually ate, we learn not just their menu, but their message, that survival is an intimacy with one's world so essential, it becomes indistinguishable from soul. And in that knowing, they are still here, smoldering in memory, fed by the silent fires we still kindle in the dark. Their story lingers not in grandeur, but in granules, not in conquest, but in continuity. From marrow hollowed with stone to tubers roasted beneath layered ash, every fragment tells of a tenacity too often overlooked. They taught their children not only how to survive, but why. To preserve the thread between self and soil, between hunger and meaning. As we peel back the Earth's layers and unearth the relics of their daily choices, we find not the echo of a lost people, but the rhythm of our own origin. In their meals, we see mirrors of ourselves, of ritual, of hope, of sustenance drawn from a world both brutal and beautiful. So we end not with their extinction, but with their endurance, remembered not in museum cases, but in the wild pulse of life that still answers fire with food, still whispers the old instinct beneath new tongues. What Neanderthals actually ate was the rhythm of the planet itself, and in tasting it, they became part of something eternal, something that feeds us still in every shadow where the old hunger stirs. So, let the story close here, in the hush after fire fades, where stone tools lie buried under beds of fallen pine needles and frost-thawed moss. The tale of what the Neanderthals actually ate is not just a catalog of ancient meals, but a reverent unfolding of human resilience whispered through time. It is in this silence that they speak most clearly, not with words, but with the enduring imprint of lives lived close to the bone, where each foraged stalk and every hunted limb reflected a sacred pact with the land. Their diet was their dialogue with the earth, and in that conversation, they authored a way of being that ripples still through the marrow of our species. In the quiet hunger that remains, in the shared warmth of wild meals around firelight, in the instinct to remember what once fed us, the Neanderthals live on, not as extinct beings, but as the oldest part of ourselves, the part that first listened, first learned, and first endured. What they calmed through those 300 millennia of glacial winters and brief summers was more than sustenance. It was knowledge transformed into survival, necessity elevated to wisdom. Every cracked bone, roasted tuber, and gathered seed carried the weight of generational learning, a culinary legacy that outlasted their physical presence. Though their hearths have long gone cold, their nutritional ingenuity persists in our own adaptability, in the silent genetic whispers that still guide human hands to distinguish poison from possibility, and in the profound understanding that to eat is to engage in the oldest conversation humans have ever known. In the lingering hush left behind by the Neanderthals, there rises a final spectacle, one made not of fossilized remains, but of the spirit of their endurance, suspended in time like mist over ancient tundra. Their meals were not simply reactions to cold or famine. They were quiet affirmations of place and purpose, reaffirmed with every foraged bulb and every beast brought down by communal effort. They did not just consume, they conversed with the earth, and through those conversations, they carved out a lineage that stitched language into silence, meaning into marrow. As we gaze across the windswept plains they once walked, their legacy survives not as a monument of triumph or tragedy, but as a memory of balance, a testament to a species who learned to read the land not with maps, but with mouths and minds. In the end, what Neanderthals actually ate was not just food, it was the story of existence itself, drafted in bitter roots and sacred flesh, and told under the dim, eternal glow of fire in the dark. And though their kind no longer walks these forests and slopes, Their Last Supper was not an end, but a communion offered to the living, to remember, to endure, and to listen each day anew to the land that once taught us how to live. The wind moves through those forgotten valleys, as it always has, heedless of who listens or remembers. Yet within its breath lies the echo of ancient flames and old hunger stilled. If the story of the Neanderthals ends anywhere, it ends here, not in burial, but in offering. An offering of knowledge born of bark and marrow, of meals handcrafted from the edge of extinction. They vanish not as shadows swallowed by time, but as ancestors who chose, each day and night, to engage in ritual with the wild. Their survival was less conquest than communion, not an overcoming of their world, but a becoming within it. And so, long after their bones have quieted into soil, and their fires dimmed into memory, they endure in every gesture of gratitude made before a meal, in every silent prayer for another day of breath, of warmth, of enough. Theirs was a diet sharpened by ice and softened by tradition, one whose ingredients were survival, reverence, and a profound intimacy with a living earth. What Neanderthals actually ate, then, was not a mystery to solve, but a reverence to remember, a story told still, each time we break bread together in the glow of firelight and look inward to the first ancestors who taught us that to eat wisely is to honor all that sustains us. Thus, in the lingering silence, where their breaths once hung in cold air and their firelit circles faded into the folds of time, the Neanderthals leave us a final, wordless feast, not of flesh or root alone, but of perspective, a deep remembering of what it means to rely wholly on land, on kin, on hard-earned knowledge passed hand to hand, voice to voice. Their diet, both austere and intricate, was never only about staying fed. It was about staying connected, mind to soil, spirit to season. And so, their last echo is not a cry, but a lesson that flickers still beneath bark and bone, that to survive is to listen, to adapt with devotion, and to approach the wild not with dominion, but with attentiveness, honesty, and care. In the ancient dialogue between hunger and harvest, the Neanderthals spoke fluently, and in answering that hunger with reverence, they etched their truth into the earth, a truth we uncover not as outsiders, but as inheritors, still warmed by the same sun, still searching for meaning in the act of breaking bread, and still learning, with each thoughtful meal, what it means to live in balance with the world that feeds us. And so, beneath the layered silence of millennia, we find not the fading of a primitive people, but the enduring breath of those who fed the fire of humanity with every careful meal. The Neanderthals, though gone from the world they once knew, remain embedded within us, in the shape of our hunger, the rhythm of our foraging thoughts, and the ceremony of every shared meal around heat and hope. They lived in a world of bone and storm, caught between extinction and invention. And yet, from this edge, they crafted a way of being that echoes still through our bones and blood. Their story closes, not in words, but in warmth, etched into the hollows of the earth, in meals remembered by the soil itself. What Neanderthals actually ate to survive was not just food, but the earth's quiet invitation to belong, to remember, to endure. And in answering that ancient invitation, they did not disappear. They became the first authors of our shared hunger, feeding the future with every bite drawn from the wild truths of the world. Somewhere deep beneath layers of peat and thyme, a tooth fragment rests cradled in mineral silence, carrying inside it the residue of elderberries crushed long ago against a weathered tongue. That sliver of enamel, fossilized and mute, still holds the fingerprints of an ancient choice. What to eat, and therefore, how to live. And so ends the chronicle of Neanderthal sustenance, not with a flourish, but with the enduring quiet of a people who lived in intimate rhythm with a world that offered little without price. Their meals were not just responses to hunger, but daily negotiations with fate, recipes scribed in ash and bone, uttered in the grammar of seasons and ice. In seeking what to eat, they found something deeper: connection, endurance, and a kind of ancestral wisdom that winds still through the shadows of our instincts. What Neanderthals actually ate was not just meat or root, but the earth's permission to remain. And in that sacred bond between forager and flame, between need and nourishment, they left us not a mystery, but a memory beneath our tongues, reminding us that survival is the most profound story we ever tell the world, with our hands, our hunger, and our hearts. So let this final ember settle into darkness, not as an ending, but as an invocation. The Neanderthals, through their sacred bond with sustenance, gifted us a mirror clearer than any artifact, a memory older than language. Their meals were their manifesto, composed in marrow and silence, and what they ate was the world itself, the roots and roebuck, the tidal weeds, the coals of endless waiting. In that primal communion, they whispered the first human truths into the soil, truths still pulsing beneath our feet, that to eat with care is to live with reverence. To remember what feeds us is to remember who we are. And so we leave them here, in the hush where cold earth meets ancient breath, not perished, but planted. Ancestors whose appetite for life seeded the future, and in whose steady hunger we find, even now, the oldest language of belonging. Let that language speak still, even now, as fires are kindled in quiet corners of our own uncertain world. In every meal born of gathered care, of wild forage or slow craft, we echo the Neanderthal legacy, not through mimicry, but through memory. The act of reaching down into the earth, of coaxing warmth from flame, of sharing food beneath sky, is the same ancient ritual that kept them alive through frozen centuries. They taught no doctrine, wrote no lines, but their story was woven into each hunt and harvest, each bitter root rendered sweet by patience. To understand what Neanderthals actually ate is to understand how they lived, with reverence strong enough to feed a lineage across 300,000 winters. And as we rise from the last embers of their tale, we carry not just knowledge of ancient diets, but a flame of empathy, ancestral and enduring, reminding us that survival has always depended not only on what we find, but on how deeply we care to remember the land, each other, and the long shared hunger that binds us all. Each time we break the soil for food, each time we share a meal beneath stars or clouds or the quiet ceilings of our homes, we participate in that ancient language left behind by the Neanderthals. Not a language of dominance or gathering for gain, but of gratitude stitched into survival. Their diets, reconstructed from bones and sediment, are more than scientific data. They are dispatches from a people who trusted the land enough to ask it how to endure. And it responded, again and again, in roots and marrow, in sea spray and smoke. What Neanderthals actually ate was not a curiosity for textbooks alone, but a compass still buried within us, pointing us back toward wholeness with the earth. Through fire-struck caves and the fossilized whispers of their resilience, they left behind something far more lasting than flesh. They left an inheritance, passed not through wealth, but through wisdom. That the path forward begins with remembering the taste of what kept us alive when the world gave little, and the will to listen when it spoke in hunger and heat, in frost, in flame, and in the eternal silence that follows a life well endured. So let the flame fade, not into forgetting, but into remembrance. In the glow of their final hearths, the Neanderthals offered more than remnants. They left behind a covenant between species and soil. Their diets were not survival in isolation, but survival as belonging, not to dominance, but to a sacred rhythm that asked each generation to learn again the patience of gathering, the reverence in preparing, the humility in consuming. From the ice-bound cliffs of what would become Europe to the root-laced streams of vanished valleys, their meals stitched time into body and body into place. What Neanderthals actually ate was a truth we are only now able to taste, that life is fed not by what we take, but by how we understand the taking. In our bones, there are echoes of them still, foraging, sharing, enduring. As the story rests now in hallowed silence, may we carry that final meal not as an ending, but as a beginning reborn each time we reach in gratitude for what the earth still miraculously provides. Let the closing wind carry their legacy onward, a current moving not backward into obscurity, but forward into consciousness. The Neanderthals, through their forging of sustenance in a world bent against them, became not only survivors, but sages of instinct. Their meals born of peril and patience taught that to eat wisely was to live wholly, not above nature, but within it. This was their true gift, not their bones nor tools, but the eternal revelation that in scarcity, reverence must rise, and through reverence, endurance is carved. What they ate reveals what they cherished, the earth in all its cruelty and generosity, seen not as something to conquer, but as akin to court. It is here, in this quiet, flickering threshold between the ancient hearths and the ones we summon today, that the Neanderthal story rests. Not concluded, but complete. Not ended, but enfolded into our breath, our hunger, our hands. And as the final shadows curl into silence, we honor them not by remembering what they lost, but by embodying what they always knew, that to truly survive, we must first learn to listen to the land, to each other, and to the meal that waits patiently within the soil, asking not for mastery, but for grace. And so, let the last ember dim, and the echoes of their story dissolve softly into the soil that cradled them. The Neanderthals, forged in ice and wisdom, fed their bodies and their future through acts of deep, unspoken communion with a world that gave nothing without question. Through every chipped stone pressed into marrow, every tuber buried beside the hearth, every hand taught to find sustenance in the quiet places, they passed down more than survival. They passed down the art of reverent endurance. What they ate was both earth and effort, silence and sacrifice, tethering millennia of hunger to hope. In the final stillness of this tale, we do not stand at the grave of a vanished line, but at the threshold of our own remembering, where every mouthful drawn from the land can be a kindling of awareness. And perhaps, if we listen closely enough to the hush left behind in glacial winds and charcoal pits. We will hear those ancient voices stir once more, not asking to be mourned, but to be understood, to be honored, and to be heard in the subtle, sacred ritual of surviving with grace. This, then, is their closing hymn, not sung, not written, but exhaled gently into the earth they fed from and fed in turn. What Neanderthals actually ate spans far beyond calories and nutrients. It is a record of allegiance, a ceremonial, lifelong union with a land as brutal as it was bountiful. In their final quiet, they gifted us the recipe for presence. To know a place so fully you can taste its seasons. To lean into necessity with reverent acuity. To build a lineage not with walls or wealth, but with the memory of which root to roast, which shell to turn in hand, which hunger to endure until the earth relents. We leave their story not with sorrow, but with sustenance, an invitation whispered through fossil and flame, that survival was their philosophy, their art, their act of devotion. They endured not because the world grew gentle, but because they learned how to bow to its harshness without breaking. So now, as dusk falls over this long tale, and the last ember curls to ash, let us not ask only what the Neanderthals ate, but what we have yet to learn from the way they lived, and what in their stead we will choose to remember, cherish, and pass on into the long hunger of the future. For this was the meal beneath all others, the silent agreement between flesh and earth that defined who we once were and who we may yet become. The Neanderthals did not die with mouths empty or minds dimmed, but with knowledge sealed into their bones, echoing down the long corridors of human endurance. What they actually ate was not a fading curiosity, but a sacred text in scent and ash, deciphered by firelight and witnessed by the stars. Their story, ending not in silence, but in sustenance, invites us to reconsider the meaning of hunger itself, as tether, as teacher, as the very engine of belonging. They remind us that survival was never just a fight against nature, but a dance with it, measured in footsteps over snow, in shared marrow and warmed roots. That to be alive is to be fed by the old fire, and to pass it, glowing and fragile, into hands that will remember. And so the tale fades gently behind us, its warmth trailing into our own modern nights where we still hunger, still gather, and still, without knowing, echo a lineage lit by the understanding that food was always and will forever be our first language with the world. So, let us close this story with the reverence it demands. The Neanderthals, who fed not merely to survive, but to connect, to endure, and to persist through ages of frost and fire, have whispered their final truths through the centuries. Their table was the wilderness, their ingredients drawn from stone and sea, forest and fire pit. Their legacy is not extinct, but woven into the fabric of what it means to be human, into the quiet rituals of nourishment that still echo in our instincts. What they ate was never just about food. It was about listening to the land until it spoke in edible language, trusting the earth's pulse, and crafting survival from shared memory. Throughout their 300,000-year reign, they perfected not just consumption, but conversation with their environment, a dialogue of necessity elevated to wisdom. In the chemistry of their teeth and the residue on their tools, we find not just evidence of past meals, but testament to an intelligence that understood sustainability long before we coined the term. Their nutritional ingenuity, allowed them to extract life from landscapes that offered little forgiveness, teaching generation after generation how to transform scarcity into sufficiency. Theirs is not a vanished echo, but a glowing thread that runs through every firelit meal we still prepare with care. And as we let the embers fade at last, we offer only silence, the kind that once filled the caves where they sat, eating not only for hunger, but for the future. This is what they left us. Not bones, but belonging. Let us end as they did, with purpose, with reverence, with the taste of the earth still on our tongues. The Neanderthals' legacy lies not in the shadows of extinction, but in the luminous wisdom that hunger can be holy, that survival is not a solitary act, but a shared vow with land and kin. Across glacial epochs and shifting terrain, they taught that to feed oneself rightly is to feed the future gently, that each act of sustenance carries with it a story, a prayer, a promise. This tale closes not as a eulogy, but as a hymn, echoing through frost-buried caves and ember-warmed hearts. What Neanderthals actually ate was not merely fuel, but fidelity to each other, to the land, to the invisible thread of life that stitched them to sky and root alike. We leave their fire now, glowing faintly behind us, but its light endures in every thoughtful harvest, every sacred meal, every act of remembering. For in honoring what they consumed, we remember not only how they lived, but how they loved the earth enough to eat carefully, gratefully, and with enduring grace. Their final gift is this: to know that to be fed is to belong. And as the final breath of their story settles into the hush of prehistory, a last truth gleams from the coals: that survival, at its most sacred, is an act of love. The Neanderthals did not endure 300,000 winters through strength alone. They endured through care, through fidelity, to a world that asked everything and gave just enough in return. In every act of nourishment, they honored that covenant. They did not conquer their landscape. They communed with it, crafting their lives from lichen and liver, from ice and instinct, until even time bowed to their resilience. Their meals, carved from hardship, sang no praise songs, needed no names, yet their echoes are with us still, in the instinct to cook, in the reverence that silences a room as bread breaks, in the ache to share what little we have. What Neanderthals actually ate, then, is the memory of how to live not apart from the earth, but as a part of it. And through that memory, glowing still beneath every fire we light against the dark, we carry their final lesson forward, not only to survive, but to belong utterly to the place that feeds us in that slow dawning of understanding. What remains of the Neanderthals is not dust in display cases or names etched into forgotten stones, but a lineage of gratitude etched deeper still into the habit of giving thanks before a meal, into the fire tenders and berry gatherers of all ages. Across their vanished epochs, they endured through reverence, feeding not only their bodies, but their bonds, kinships forged beside smoke and sustained by the earth's reluctant offerings. As we leave behind the last traces of their diet, we do not look back to mourn a fallen species. We look forward, carrying their resilience as compass and their knowledge as nourishment. For what Neanderthals actually ate was not only marrow and root, but the continuity of life itself, passed from hand to hand, like fire, like love. This is their parting gift, to remind us that every meal is an act of remembering, and that to remember is to love a world that feeds us. Still, in silence, in soil, and through the flicker of firelight that never truly dies. So as the final words slip into the hush, where glacial wind once lifted ash through cave air, and the roots of ancient valleys drank deeply from snowmelt and blood, let the memory of the Neanderthals settle into us, not as sorrow, but as reverence. Their story stands not as a tale extinguished, but as a fire dimmed carefully, deliberately, so that others might see in the smoke a way forward. What they ate was not a mystery solved, but a truth shared, that survival is an act of devotion, of listening, of grateful return to the earth that made them. Across 300,000 winters and births, icy silences and sunlit thaws, they gathered, hunted, foraged, and fed one another not for glory, but because life willed it, and the land allowed it. And so, with this last echo carried through time like flame on breath, we do not close their chapter. We keep it lit, in memory, in soil, in firelight shared, because the hunger they answered lives on, not in the past, but in us. So here, in the long shadow of 300 millennia, where their footprints have long since slipped beneath stone and snow, let the last word be not of hunger, but of harmony. The Neanderthal's tale, woven through fire and frost, does not vanish in extinction. It resolves into the living soil of our own reflection. Their meals were their manuscripts, each bite an articulation of belonging. And though no song or scripture remains, their truth still breathes in the pulse of the earth they once called home. Let us not remember only what Neanderthals actually ate, but why it was the ultimate act of reverence, an enduring promise between dust and breath, that to live is to listen, and to feed is to honor. And in the silence that now follows their saga, warmed by the final glow of their ancient hearths, we inherit not just their memory, but their method, the sacred art of enduring, one mindful meal at a time, beneath the same stars they once watched flicker above their wild and wondrous world. So here, between ash and dream, in the hush that follows ancient fire, let us fold the last ember of their story into our own. The Neanderthals, with their dirt-lined hands and frost-kissed breath, fed not just themselves, but the marrow of what it means to be human. They taught no creed, they left no codex, but in every roasted seed and shared cut of meat, they preserved a sacred rhythm, a way of relating to the wild, not with profound humility. Their meals told time, carried love, mapped memory. We do not honor them by lamenting their loss, but by remembering the sanctity with which they treated every bite, every moment of being fed beneath unkind skies. In their final silence, we hear the oldest knowledge stir, that the land does not merely sustain us, it remembers us, and in feeding it wisely, we are held within its timeless embrace. What Neanderthals actually ate to survive 300,000 years was not merely food. It was a covenant with the earth, a daily vow renewed with bone and breath, a legacy now resting in our hands, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be lived. And so, beneath the closing canopy of stars that once shimmered over glacial valleys and smoke-threaded caves, we step away from the Neanderthal fires, not in farewell, but in quiet gratitude. Their story, shaped in marrow and moss, in resilience and ritual, has curled its long root into our collective memory, hidden beneath every instinct to share, to forage, to nourish, with care. what they actually ate becomes, in its final telling, less a list of ancient items than a reflection of relationship, a reverence for place and season, a language spoken through hand and heat. In the coldest hours of humanity's dawn, they taught that survival was not simply endurance, but devotion to the land's silent teachings. And in that devotion, we find ourselves still, kindling fires, breaking bread, listening for the oldest recipe of all, to live not apart from the world, but within it, gratefully, humbly, and awake. The Neanderthal flame burns low now, but in our bones, our hunger, and our remembrance, it still glows. And where there is fire, there is story. And where there is story, there is life enduring, carved not in stone, but in sustenance. So let this be the final ember, glowing softly in the stillness of all that came before. The Neanderthals, once cloaked in cold air and ancestral dust, showed us that to eat was never just to endure. It was to belong, to shape culture through necessity, ritual through knowledge, and future through fire. They disappeared not in weakness, but in legacy, their memory stitched invisibly through every modern hand that gathers, every heart that remembers nourishment as reverence. In knowing what they ate, we come closer to knowing how to live, not as conquerors of the earth, but as keepers of its wisdom. The roots they tasted, the marrow they shared, the seaweed they dried beneath fading suns, all whisper one enduring truth through time's long breath, that survival lived in the sacred act of feeding one another, and through that act, they became immortal in the story of us all. Their diet was not merely what they could find, but what they could transform through patient knowledge, through community effort, through the slow alchemy of fire and stone. Each meal they crafted represented not just calories consumed, but a profound understanding of landscape, an intricate web of relationship with every plant, animal, and season that surrounded them. To study what Neanderthals ate is to witness a masterclass in adaptation, a 300,000-year testament to human ingenuity expressed not through monument or text, but through the simple sacred act of nourishing life amid the harshest conditions imaginable. So, let us gather all that remains: the flint-marked bones, the softened seeds, the shadows on cave walls glowing with reflective fire. In their totality, they form a final testament, more enduring than any written word, more primal than any recorded myth. What Neanderthals actually ate was nothing less than the earth itself, made edible by reverent patience and ancestral devotion. With every meal, they wove meaning from scarcity, connection from hunger, ritual from necessity. And though their voices have fallen silent, the rhythm of their lives, theirs was a life of teaching through doing, of surviving through knowing, beats on beneath our skin. As the embers die and the cold seeps in, we step from their hearth, grateful, humbled, and blessed with the inheritance they left. Not just their bones, but their way of seeing the land, of honoring its silence, of tasting its truth. In learning what Neanderthals ate, we rediscover the heart of humanity. That to eat is not just to survive, but to remember that we belong to each other, to the past, and to the patient, sacred earth that fed us then and feeds us still. And so, with the Neanderthal fire now fading slowly into the silence of stone and sediment, we close the final chapter of their ancient nourishment, not in grief, but in awe. These beings, shrouded for so long in misconceptions, emerge instead as quiet architects of survival, whose meals were shaped not by indulgence, but by intimacy with terrain, season, and scarcity. Every scraping of bone, every root pulled from frozen soil, every bitter leaf tasted and remembered, carried forward a lineage, acculturated, not just to endure, but to belong. What the Neanderthals actually ate was a lifeline spun from frost and fire, from hunger met with honor, and in honoring their diet, we do something more than learn. We remember. We remember how to look at the land not as a resource, but as a relative, how to feed not just stomachs, but stories, and how, in the very act of preparing food, we shape memory, meaning, and lineage. Their last shared meals echo still, not lost, but lived, every time a flame flickers over gathered roots, every time a meal is offered with care. In the spaces where their wisdom nestles dormant beneath earth and snow, it waits not to be mourned, but rekindled. And, in naming what they ate, we whisper back our understanding, that it was never just meat or marrow, never just sustenance. It was reverence served warm beneath the stars, a communion with the world that once held them, and still holds us all. And so, as the last thread of smoke winds skyward from the memory of a Neanderthal hearth, the tale weaves to its end, not with applause, but with aching reverence. For in every root singed by flame, in every marrow-slick stone, and in every child taught to forage by the wisdom of fading ancestors, there burns a quiet promise that even in the most brutal climates, humanity listens, learns, and loves the earth enough to live with it, not above it. To understand what Neanderthals actually ate is to peel back the veneer of time and find not savagery, but subtlety, not desperation, but depth. They consumed not merely to survive, but to remember, to belong, and to wrap each life in the soil's reluctant offerings, transforming hunger into ritual and survival into communion. This story does not end in extinction, but in extension, carried forward in our genetic memory, in our instinctual responses to certain foods, in our deeply rooted traditions of gathering around fire to share meals. Archaeological evidence continues to reveal the sophisticated nature of their diet, from chemical analysis of dental calculus, showing plant compounds, to isotope studies, confirming their remarkable adaptability across different ecosystems. As the embers fade at last beneath moss and memory, we walk forward, carrying their knowledge not in our hands, but in our hunger, still learning, still listening, still gathered around the ancient fire they first kindled. And there, in the diminishing firelight of their epic, the Neanderthals entrust us with the final morsel of their ancient truth, that to eat from the earth was to become part of its breath, its bone, its longing. Across glacial winters and thaws, across hunger that carved wisdom into bone, they made ritual of the ordinary and forged permanence from perishability. The foods they gathered, hunted, nurtured, and remembered were never random, but deliberate gestures of devotion to a world that only answered the patient. They carried no titles, etched no monuments, but in shared marrow and root, in roasted seed and patient fermentation, they charted the first sacred geography of survival. Their diet transformed necessity into ritual, converting mere subsistence into cultural identity. Through careful observation and generational knowledge, they developed sophisticated foraging strategies that maximized nutritional intake while minimizing risk. This was no mere accident of evolution, but a deliberate cultivation of ecological wisdom. Archaeological evidence reveals how they selectively harvested plants with medicinal properties, distinguished between nutritious and toxic varieties of similar-looking species, and understood the seasonal cycles that governed abundance and scarcity. We step from their vanished path, not burdened by their absence, but illuminated by their presence, ancient, enduring, etched not only into soil and stone, but into the very framework of our ability to care, to connect, to feed, and be fed. Their last supper, long since returned to dust, was not an extinction, but a communion left burning for those who would listen. And in that listening, we are reminded that to truly survive is not only to eat, but to remember how to love the land that lets us. In the flickering remains of that ancient light, the Neanderthals leave behind not only a memory, but a mirror. It reflects our most elemental truths, the hunger that binds, the wisdom that sustains, the silent reverence passed hand to hand across eons. What they actually ate, beneath snow-laced skies and beside fire-warmed stones, was not just survival, but selfhood, tasted and translated into culture through repetition and care. Their story ends as it must, not in finality, but in seed form, sown deeply into our hungers and hopes. And as we rise from the embers of their tale, stepping softly through the soil, still whispering their names, we carry not just curiosity, but kinship. For though their flesh is long gone, and their firestones grown cold, their legacy lives on in every careful meal shaped by gratitude, every root unearthed with respect, every flicker of flame that reminds us, quietly, insistently, that to eat in communion with the earth is to honor all who came before and all who have yet to come. What Neanderthals consumed wasn't merely food, it was relationship. The mutual promise between a people and their landscape, a covenant written not in text, but in the careful selection of which plants to harvest, which animals to hunt, and which techniques would transform raw sustenance into nourishment for both body and community. Through their profound understanding of seasonal cycles, medicinal properties of plants, and sustainable hunting practices, they developed not just a diet, but a worldview, one where hunger and gratitude walked hand in hand beneath the ancient stars. So now, as the voices of the past settle softly into the earth and the flicker of Neanderthal flame fades into stillness, their legacy remains tender and unbroken, not as echoes distanced by extinction, but as seeds of memory planted deep within the marrow of our species. What they actually ate was not just the flora and fauna of an ice age world, but the essence of survival honed by listening, adjusting, persevering. They crafted their lives through each sustained flame, each shared portion, each scar of failed harvest transmuted into future wisdom. Their world of ice and silence has retreated into history, yet in its place stands us, inheritors of ancient knowledge encoded in our very cells. We eat not for pleasure alone, but to participate in a lineage that began in shadowed caves and continues unbroken. The Neanderthals did not simply vanish. They were absorbed into the great rhythm of life, their genetic material woven into our DNA, their survival instincts still whispering which root to dig, which fire to light, when to preserve, and when to share. In their dietary practices, we witness the first sacred art of nourishment, and in that art, we inherit the eternal truth that in feeding ourselves with care and respect, we echo the oldest heartbeats of humanity. Their final lesson lingers in every bite made sacred by memory, every meal prepared with reverence, as if the earth itself is watching, as if these ancient ones still sit beside us, warmed by the glow of firelight, remembering the taste of survival across 300 millennia of ice and fire. So, we end here, at the edge of time's long drift, where the Neanderthal story, spoken in the language of food and fire, yields its final warmth. Across 300,000 years, their meals were more than mere sustenance. They were ceremonies of connection between kin and earth, season and survival, memory and meaning. What Neanderthals actually ate was never just meat or tuber, but trust in the land that shaped them, a dialogue of reciprocity etched into every flame-charred root and marrow-streaked stone. Though their bones have settled into silence, their wisdom lingers beneath our footsteps, pulsing softly in the instincts that guide our hands, our hunger, and our hope. Let us remember them not as shadows lost to extinction, but as voices still echoing through the soil, reminding us with every harvest and hearth that to eat with reverence is to be human, and to be human is to never forget those who first taught the earth how to sustain us through tenderness, through grit, and through grace. This fire now dims, but its embers remain within us, glowing quietly, eternally, in the shared act of passing nourishment from one life to another, an ancient bond, unbroken. So, as this final circle draws to a close, let us leave the Neanderthals much as we found them, gathered in silence, hands calloused by earth and fire, shadows flickering gently against ancient stone. Their tale, traced not in grand ruins, but in the intimate arc of daily survival, speaks to something enduring beneath our skin. For 300,000 years, they answered hunger with ingenuity, scarcity with solemn care, and through every crafted tool and roasted meal, they stitched the earliest fabric of our humanity. What they actually ate now becomes less a question of menu and more a revelation of mindset, a worldview forged in frost and flame, reminding us that the true legacy of their diet was not what filled the belly, but what filled the soul. As the hearth dims and the wind retakes the fields they once walked, we carry more than their memory. We carry their reverence. Their fire lives on, echoing through every thoughtful harvest, every morsel seasoned by gratitude, every quiet moment where we pause before eating and feel the centuries behind us. In this, they are not gone. They are present still, woven into the breath between bites, still guiding us, one meal at a time, back into communion with the earth that first taught us how to live. And thus, the light falls gently for the final time upon the ancient tale of what Neanderthals truly ate to survive. Through frost-rimed valleys and fire-lit caverns, they did more than endure. They flourished for 300,000 years by turning hunger into heritage, foraging into philosophy. Their meals whispered devotion to land and kin, a quiet language passed down flame to hand, tooth to root. What they consumed was the essence of belonging, a communion with every bone-cracked echo and blistered tuber that the earth, in its stern generosity, laid before them. As we depart from their deep silence and return once more to our own lives, we carry with us not just answers, but echoes, reminders that to be fed is also to remember how to listen, how to honor, how to live. In learning what the Neanderthals ate, we discover not simple carnivores or primitive gatherers, but masters of adaptation who crafted sophisticated relationships with their environment. Their culinary wisdom reflected profound ecological understanding, transforming scarce resources into sustenance through techniques refined over countless generations. They knew precisely which plants held medicinal properties, which roots required careful cooking to neutralize toxins, which seasonal foods must be preserved to survive brutal winters. This knowledge wasn't merely practical, but sacred, encoded in ritual and community, passed down as their most precious inheritance. In their story, we awaken to a legacy both fragile and fierce, an ancestral rhythm pulsing still beneath each fire we build, each meal we share, each thankful breath we take beneath the same stars that once watched them endure. So we extinguish the final ember of this long memory, not with sorrow, but with solemn guardianship. The Neanderthals, through root and marrow, seaweed and fire, left behind a map not of places, but of practices, a sacred cartography of surviving with grace. Their diet was no accident of desperation, but a curated wisdom sung in the language of seasons, ecosystems, and kinship. In their choices lay a reverence we can scarcely comprehend, and in their silence, a challenge that still speaks. To remember not only what the earth gives, but how to ask with humility and to receive with care. What Neanderthals actually ate was not simply the sum of Ice Age calories, but a delicately tended legacy, a world tasted one cautious, knowing bite at a time. We carry their story now, as all descendants must, not in bones or tools alone, but in the way we touch the land, the way we speak to hunger, and the way we choose, meal after meal, to remember them with every fire we light in the dark. And now, with the last breath of that ancient fire curling toward the obsidian sky, the story concludes not in absence, but in offering. The Neanderthals leave behind no written prose, no carved monuments, yet every meal they prepared, every bite of marrow or foraged root, was a verse in the long poem of human survival. In tasting the land and trusting its rhythms, they composed not just a diet, but a doctrine of coexistence. Their legacy endures within us, not as theory, but as instinct. When we season with memory, when we pause to thank the soil, when we gather around flame with open hands, this is their final inheritance, a lineage of deep knowing, of eating not in hunger alone, but in harmony. Beneath the weight of time and earth, the Neanderthal flame settles into silence, but its glow remains kindled within us, guiding each of us back toward the wisdom of the world they fed from with grace. Their sophisticated culinary practices reflected not merely survival techniques, but a profound communion with their environment, transforming scarce resources through methods refined over countless generations. They recognized which plants held healing properties, which required careful cooking to remove toxins, which seasonal bounty must be preserved through winter's grip. Let that light, low and eternal, remind us always that the first true knowledge was not in weapon or word, but in the reverent, steady hand that knew how to make a meal. So here, in the long hush after firelight fades, let this closing meal of memory settle among the stones that once knew their warmth. The Neanderthals gave us no epics carved in granite, only the enduring art of survival served quietly in root and ash, in ritually shared meat and rain-washed leaves. What they actually ate was the earth, yes, but more than that, it was each other's presence, the steadiness of generations teaching survival, not by dominance, but by devotion. Their final inheritance needs no tombstone. It glows each time hunger meets gratitude, each time a child watches a flame and wonders what came before, each time we choose not what is easiest, but what has meaning. Their memory lingers not as an echo, but as a breath, shaping the way we gather food, offer it up, and remember that to eat wisely is to live rightly. In that profound understanding, their fire is not gone. It is carried forward, ember by ember, within all who recognize that the Neanderthal legacy was never simply about consumption, but about connection, a sacred dialogue with landscape that sustained them through 300,000 years of ice and change, and that still whispers to us whenever we pause to truly taste the world. So, let us now place the final stone upon this ancient table, not as closure, but as tribute. The Neanderthals, in their long communion with a wild and merciless world, fed not only their bodies, but the very foundation of what we now call human endurance. In every act of roasting, foraging, preserving, and sharing, they sustained a species at the threshold of history with grace born of necessity. What they actually ate was less revelation than reminder that survival is sacred, and that wisdom often comes unspoken, simmered in the patience of generations. Their story burns on in the quiet rhythms of meals prepared with love, in the ancestral memory that stirs as we kneel beside the soil or listen for the wind's secrets in the trees. Long after their fire faded to ember, their legacy endures, asking us not to mourn, but to remember that in eating with reverence, we reclaim the oldest inheritance of all, to belong utterly and humbly to the earth that feeds us, and in whose silence their voices still murmur, warm and eternal. Beneath every flame we dare to light, and thus, as the last light of their world flickers out behind the veil of time, the Neanderthals disappear, not as a people forgotten, but as a wisdom that echoes in every crackling fire, every careful harvest, every silent gesture of thanks before a shared meal. They leave behind no scripture, no flag, yet their legacy rises from the soil in the form of continuity, a resonance passed not in words, but in rituals of nourishment and belonging. What Neanderthals actually ate was a question that led us not only to their resilience, but to our reflection, to the understanding that sustenance has always been a sacred conversation between life and place. In every root pulled from frozen ground, every marrow-rich bone shattered by knowing hands, we see that their survival was not merely a feat of strength, but of reverence. They lived close to the edge of existence and, in doing so, carved the first path of wisdom into the earth for us to follow. Through meticulous analysis of dental calculus, bone chemistry, and hearth remains, archaeologists have reconstructed not just a diet, but a philosophy, revealing beings who understood their environment with profound intimacy. Their nutritional ingenuity allowed them to transform scarcity into sufficiency through methods still reflected in traditional foraging cultures today. So we close this tale not with an answer, but with a promise that we will remember them not only in data and stone, but in the way we gather food with care, tend fire with love, and listen, always, for the rhythm of the land that once fed them, and that, even now, still feeds us all. So, in this final breath beneath the weight of centuries, the Neanderthals passed to us their unspoken gospel, that to survive was not merely to eat, but to listen, to honor, and to return again and again to the fragile dance between hunger and the earth's hard mercy. Their legacy? carved not in monuments, but in the bone-deep memory of meals shared under frostbitten skies, remains with us still, vibrant in the flicker of firelight, in the scent of wood smoke rising over gathered voices, in the instinctual pause before the first bite. What they actually ate over a span of 300,000 unforgiving years was their environment made sacred through ritual and understanding, a slow alchemy of resilience honoring tradition over time. And as we walk away from their hearth, that glow fading into the long hush of history, we carry with us not just the facts of their diet, but the feeling, enduring and reverent, of a people who fed themselves with knowledge, not conquest, who offered gratitude with every meal, and who remind us still, with wordless wisdom, that survival, at its most sacred, is an act of belonging. So now, let this final ember ash into stillness, and let the story of Neanderthals settle into our collective soul, not as a myth, but as a memory perpetually alive in the soil, the flame, and the shared harvests of humankind. Across icebound centuries, they ate without excess, lived without entitlement, and endured through a sacred attentiveness that connected hunger to humility. Their meals were threaded with meaning, their diets shaped not by domination, but by deep, patient relationship with the rhythm of seasons and silence. In honoring what they consumed, we find the truest gift they left us, the knowledge that every bite taken with care binds us not only to ancient kin, but to a future still hungry for belonging. They are gone, yes, but not lost. For every act of reverence around food, every whispered name of root or beast stirs their essence once more. Their fire may flicker in the distance, but it waits, watching, reminding, warming the path through darkness with the most ancient legacy of all: to live wisely from the land, in gratitude and together.